Hi, everyone. I guess you can hear me. I'm so thrilled to be here to have the opportunity to speak to you all on a topic I'm very passionate about. I am the executive director of a nonprofit organization in the US called Epidemic Answers. And for the last 10 years or so, I have been documenting the stories of children who have reversed every kind of chronic condition that you can imagine, ranging from autism, ADHD, autoimmune diseases, allergies, asthma. And so what I'm going to talk to you a little bit about today is looking at the escalating rates of chronic conditions in children from an etiology perspective. In other words, why are we seeing so many kids that are impacted today? And what can we do with that information to actually help our kids to thrive, to help optimize their health potential? So what I'm going to talk to you today about is understanding autism through the lens of a theory that's called the total load theory. And this is a theory that's been emerging out of the United States. And I think it will help you understand some very concrete strategies and ideas about how to optimize your child's health and functioning. So with that, I just want to set the stage, which is that I want to remind everyone that autism is an epidemic. It's a global epidemic. It's rising in every country, but it's particularly high in prevalence in industrialized nations. In modern industrialized nations, you're seeing the highest rates of autism. So the United States in particular, and again, this is my experience is largely in the United States, you are seeing skyrocketing rates of autism. And you're looking at rates that were just a few decades ago, 1 in 10,000 children were diagnosed with an autism spectrum disorder. To today, the most recent statistics out are looking at 1 in 38 children in the United States. So the question often is, well, isn't it just that we're better at diagnosing these children? And the short answer to that is yes. We are so much better at diagnosing these children, so we're finding more of them that we wouldn't have otherwise found, or we might have called them something different. There would have been a different diagnostic label. However, based on some significant epidemiological research that's been done in the United States, we now know that the percentage of children that have a diagnosis of autism is not just due to better diagnosis, that there is, in fact, a frank increase. And that's what this slide here shows. The dark color here shows the number of kids that are due to increased diagnostics, better diagnostics, and then the rest is unaccounted for. So we have this question of why are we seeing so many new cases of autism? And what I want to talk to you about is if we can understand why we're seeing so many cases of autism, it helps us better understand how it develops, and that gives us insights into interventions and how we can help children. So let's just put this into the context of where we've been in our understanding of autism. You can go back to 1943 and look at Kanner's model of autism. And Kanner's model was that autism was largely due to relationships, to the parent, particularly a mother's child, a relationship to her child. That model was sort of put out of favor, and then by the time you get into, say, the 1990s, where you see a significant increase in the number of children being diagnosed with autism, there's this new model or new understanding of what autism is, and it was that it's a genetic, brain-based disorder. It's largely intractable, meaning there really isn't a whole lot that you can do about it. It's not medically treatable other than symptom suppression, so perhaps some pharmaceuticals to help with anxiety or depression, those kinds of things. However, that paradigm is changing substantially. So what you're seeing now is people are beginning to understand autism in terms of physiology. In other words, that the brain is a part of the body. It's an organ in the body. And the health of the cells throughout the body influence and impact the health, functioning, and development of the brain. So now we see autism as a whole body disorder where immunology is a major factor in it, where what's going on in the gastrointestinal tract, for instance, is very much related to what's happening in the brain. So this is really changing our understanding of what autism is and also how we can work with children with autism. So again, this is no longer viewed as just a genetic brain-based disorder, with a few exceptions. There's Rett syndrome, and there's Fragile X, and some other kinds of genetic components. There's many kids with Down syndrome who also have autism as a diagnosis concurrently. But even for those kids who have a genetic syndrome, there is this understanding that if you impact the physiology, if you improve the health of the whole body, of the whole child, and all the cells in the body, you're also going to improve the health of the brain, and then you're going to be able to improve the functioning of the brain. So, as an example, what were once viewed as comorbidities in autism, so a prime example of that is gastrointestinal disease, so inflammatory bowel disease, chronic constipation, chronic diarrhea. Those were once seen as secondary to autism. Well, it's just the autism that's causing the gastrointestinal symptoms. That's been flipped on its head, and now people are looking and saying, could what's going on in the gut actually be precipitating some of the symptoms of what's going on in the brain? And as an example, in your gastrointestinal tract, there's microbes. There's a whole ecology of microbes called the microbiome. Microbes are partly responsible for producing really important brain chemicals, or being involved in that process of producing serotonin, for instance, which is a neurotransmitter, which impacts mood, which impacts sleeps, which impacts memory and function. So these are things that we're beginning to understand now, that maybe if there's gastrointestinal symptoms, that might mean that there's something out of balance in the gastrointestinal tract, particularly microbial, and then maybe that's impacting brain function. So there's a whole number of fields: neuroimmunology, functional medicine, functional neurology, bioregulatory systems medicine. These are all emerging fields of medicine and science that are beginning to provide all kinds of insights into what autism is and how we can best help our kids. So it's giving us tremendous opportunity to see the possibility of something totally different than what we imagined before for our kids with autism. So in fact, now, especially in the United States, we're beginning to hear the word recovery used a lot in autism communities. And what do I mean by that word recovery? So there are some cases in the medical literature where there has been documented cases of recovery. And what that means is full reversal of the diagnosis, so such that a child would diagnose at a certain point, they had certain kinds of interventions, and then they lost their diagnosis. That means they no longer met the criteria for the diagnosis, so the child is therefore considered recovered. There's a lot of controversy around this word, but there are many anecdotal cases, a few documented cases that are sort of beginning to help us understand that this phenomenon might be happening. And so much so that actually in the United States in the last, I would say, 10 plus years, there's been a proliferation of medical clinics that are actually dedicated just to treating autism from a biomedical, physiological kind of perspective. This is an example of one child that I know that was previously diagnosed with autism. He lost his diagnosis. So what this is right here is a discharge paper from his physician, and it says, previously diagnosed with autism, underwent years of intensive ABA, OT, speech therapy, and medical and nutritional therapies. He no longer has autism. His developmental delays have resolved. He no longer requires or needs to receive therapy. So this is the kind of thing that's happening, again, anecdotally. However, there are cases of autism reversal documented in the medical literature. From the state that I've lived in for the last 13 years, Connecticut, there is a researcher, her name's Dr. Deborah Fine, who has looked at this question. Are there documented cases? Can we find these cases of children who had a clear diagnosis and then got better? So in 2013, she published a study where she found 34 cases of children with autism who had achieved what she called optimal outcome, which meant that they actually lost their diagnosis and were mainstreamed in school and were indistinguishable from their neurotypical peers. She published a second paper where she looked at of 207 children, 9% had achieved optimal outcome. There's another study out of Spain that found that 20% of the cases that they tracked also had accomplished a satisfactory social and occupational adaptation, which basically meant they had dropped their diagnosis. So there is this in the medical literature, okay? So what they're observing is that in these studies, they're saying, well, how does this happen? How do we know that these kids what did these families do that led to this kind of optimal outcome? And so what they observed was that it was earlier parent concern and earlier intervention. And I'm sure you've heard that a million times over the course of these 2 days. Early intervention, of course, is key. So I want to dive a little bit deeper into this and talk about what else is happening here that allows these children to achieve optimal outcome. So I'm going to give you a couple case studies. This is Aiden. This is a young man. He's no longer a child, but he's a young man that I know. He was diagnosed with autism at age 2.5. He was nonverbal, had seizures, apraxia, self-injurious behaviors, and for him, ABA and OT didn't have an impact. They didn't see any change using those two modalities. So what happened is his mother became very educated. She went on the internet and started learning about the underlying physiological elements of autism that were precipitating her son's symptoms. And she did nutrition, and she did a personalized biomedical approach with an integrative physician who practices functional medicine. She did detoxification approaches, she did audio integration, sensory integration, and now Aiden had lost his diagnosis by the time he was 6 years old. So he no longer has any signs or symptoms of autism. He's traveled throughout China on his own. He attended Wesleyan University in Connecticut. He's doing great. This is another case study. This is Leo, who was diagnosed with autism at age 2. And for those of you who might be thinking, well, they probably didn't have autism in the first place. Like it wasn't even there. Maybe they were misdiagnosed. This child, and also the same with Aiden, they were both diagnosed at the Yale Child Study Center, which is a very prestigious institution that probably would not make an error in their diagnosis to that degree. And this child had been pretty significantly impacted. He had severe stimming behavior, social and communication impairments. He wasn't talking, sensory integration, perseverance, very low frustration point, constantly tantrumed. He also had the comorbidities that we talk about. He had asthma, he had allergies, he had chronic diarrhea. Clearly, this child's immune system was out of whack. And I'll explain a little bit in a minute why that's so significant. So what his parents did is they did a gluten-free, casein-free diet that was tailored. It removed allergenic foods. It was organic, free of things that he was sensitive to. They also did a home-based natural environment ABA program, detoxification, allergy elimination. They did an integrated and very intensive kind of approach, and Leo lost his diagnosis by age 5. If you're interested in learning more about Leo's story, there's a website here called hiddenrecovery.com where his mom documented every single step of the way. So what I'm telling to you, and this is just 2 of many cases that I know personally of children who have lost their diagnosis. And this is not exclusive to autism. This is happening with life-threatening food allergies. It's happening with asthma. It's happening with type 2 diabetes and obesity. It's happening with autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis that people think are lifelong, genetic, inherited. There's nothing you can do. And that may not be the case. So what I've been doing over the last decade or so is documenting these stories. When I hear about a story of a child that got better, I want to know, what did they do? How did they do it? Which doctors did they use? What strategies? What therapeutics? What interventions? And what you see as a common denominator across the board, what do all these stories have in common? There's not a lot that's in common in terms of, a protocol or a set approach that they did, because each one approached their own child as a bioindividual. Meaning that what helps this child is not going to be the same thing that helps this child. And that's one of the foundations and keys to this whole thing. But what they did have in common is that the family began to embrace natural in all forms. In other words, they worked very hard on organic, nutrient-dense food going into their child every day. They worked on building microbiome diversity. That's the microbes that live in your gastrointestinal tract in and around your body that can be disrupted by antibiotics or reflux medication or steroid or hormone medications. They focused on natural rhythms, making sure their child was sleeping, going outside, getting fresh air and sunlight and clean water. I mean, I'm talking about real basics. Okay, and the thing that they did on the other side is they decreased stressors. Okay, so that meant they avoided things that were what we might call new to nature, chemicals, toxins, things in processed food, or anything that's like a medication, that's something that's chemical or foreign to the body. Something that wasn't around 75 years ago should not be in your child's life. That was kind of their approach. If it's new, if it's synthetic, if it's chemical, I'm taking it out of my child's life. And there's many more components. And then, especially in autism, the one thing that you see that differentiates autism from some of the other immune disorders like asthma or like an autoimmune disorder is that these parents found targeted therapeutics that their child needed. For instance, sensory integration, or audio integration, vision therapy, reflex integration, brain-body connection kind of activities, or therapies. So there's a rehabilitation of brain function that is more unique to the autism cases than some of the other cases. So looking at cases, again, these are anecdotal. So my question to you, just to put out there to think about, is does anecdotal cases, do they matter? Okay, does that matter? Do we trust that that means anything? And I just want you to think about that for a second. Because what we can see by studying these cases of children who have dropped a diagnosis, it supports this theory called the total load theory. And I'm just going to read this that was written by one of the people that originated this concept. And it says, when a bridge collapses, who or what is to blame? Improperly placed machinery, the engineer who conceived the design, the weight of the cars traveling over the bridge every day, the weather. Total load theory postulates that it's the cumulative effect of all of these factors that brought down the bridge. And this is by Patricia Lemmer, who wrote a book called Outsmarting Autism. And she has a colleague named Dr. Martha Herbert, who's somebody that I work with. She's a pediatric neurologist, formerly of Harvard Medical School and Mass General Hospital. And these two books, The Autism Revolution and Outsmarting Autism, talk about the total load theory and talk about how it isn't so much a singular thing that's causing autism. You know, in the population, globally, why are we seeing this epidemic? It's more the cumulative impact of modern living that is affecting our children's health, immune function, their growth, and their development. So that's what's meant by the total load theory, the cumulative impact. So here's some key insights out of these two books that sort of encapsulate what total load theory is about. So autism is a whole body disorder. Again, brain function is dependent on the health of the cells and what else is going on in the body. So that autism can be conceived of as a medical condition in the sense that you can treat the total load. You can reduce the total load of stressors on the body, and you can increase the supports that you need to build resilience in the body. So if you take this example, okay, if you think of the human body, your child's body as a barrel, okay, and think about living 100 years ago. There are so many stressors in the environment, in our daily lives that were not there, that are present in our children's lives every single day. So those could be, you know, sugar and refined carbohydrates. It could be environmental toxins, like heavy metals like lead and cadmium and mercury. It could be the EMFs coming from all of our electronics. There's so many things that are stressors in our environment. So if you think about each one of these things that's new to nature, that's chemical synthetic, that is something that our bodies are not used to, think of them as drops of water going into this barrel. Okay? At some point, the barrel is going to fill up. Now, also think of this barrel as something that can grow in size and can shrink in size. So there's things that make your barrel bigger and stronger, and that would be a loving parent, clean water, clean air, good, healthy, nutrient-dense food, natural movements, sleep, being in rhythm with nature, getting up when the sun rises, going to bed when the sun sets. These are things that build your resilience or make your barrel stronger and have the capacity to take more of these stressors. So if you think about what's happening to our children in the modern world, and this does not just go for autism, this goes for children in virtually every category, diagnostic category. They have too many stressors, not enough supports. It's resulting in the little teeny tiny barrels that they have tipping over, and when it tips over, that's symptom expression. That's when these kids are starting to show developmental problems, learning problems, autoimmune issues, you name it. So with autism in particular, so why is it that one child with autism looks different, maybe has the same load as a child who has asthma? And why does the child develop autism instead of developing asthma? And if you think about it, What this really is about is when and how were those stressors experienced by that individual child. And so what I would say is that the children who develop autism have these loads, their total load is too great during critical developmental periods. So that could be prenatally. Think about how critical prenatal period is for growth and development of a human body and a human brain. That could be in the first month of life. That could be within, the first 2 years of life. And you've heard about regressive autism. Sometimes regressive autism is about that kid's bucket was so full, and it got a few things that tipped it over. And that's when you see regressive autism. So that we know that some improvements can be seen for some children by looking at the stressors in their environment, assessing the imbalances in their bodies, and trying to decrease the total load for them and create opportunities for them to grow along a normal trajectory. There's a ton of medical literature on this. I'm not making this up. Okay, so you guys can't read this. I put it in here because if you have access to this presentation later, I want you to go look at these pieces of literature, okay? You're gonna see things like children with autism have autoantibody to brain tissue, that there's neuroinflammation. Autism has an autoimmune component. They have autoantibodies to gastrointestinal tissue. There are physiological imbalances in these children's bodies that's impacting their ability to grow, develop, learn. Okay, so what kinds of physiological imbalances can we measure? And what do we see in autism? So that means like lab tests. You can do lab tests to see what kind of imbalances there are. So here's just some examples, and there are many. I think the most important one is the gut microbes. The microbes that live in your gastrointestinal tract, they've found that children with autism have a decreased diversity. It's like any other ecology in the world of plants and animals, ecology in a pond. Children with autism have decreased diversity of microbes in their gastrointestinal tract. Children who are neurotypical have greater diversity. Okay, so that's something that you can address. That's actually addressable. Cellular toxicity. You can measure this. You can get a blood test, a urine test, a hair test with varying degrees of accuracy, but you can tell whether there is mercury or lead in your child's body. And if there is, it's addressable. It's modifiable. There's things you can do. I could go on. But what I wanted to illustrate is that you can measure these imbalances, and then you can look for things in and around your child's life that contribute to these imbalances. So again, bringing up the gastrointestinal tract and the microbes in the gastrointestinal tract. Antibiotics. Antibiotics are terrible for gut health. And if they're terrible for gut health, they're terrible for brain health, and they're terrible for development. So you can actually say no to antibiotics, unless of course it's a life-threatening illness. That's a modifiable factor. And there's many things. Pesticides. If you can make a choice to eat foods that don't have pesticides on them, that's going to make a difference on your child's total load. So the idea here is to decrease the stressors on your child's body, increase the supports, and then use bioindividual therapeutics, meaning maybe they need reflex integration, maybe they need audio integration therapy, whatever it is, to help rehabilitate any kind of damage that was done to their brain, any kind of wiring that needs to be done in their brain that was missed developmentally. So my question is, if recovery is possible for some children, like I just mentioned, like Leo and Aiden, is it possible for all children? And maybe not even full recovery, but are there better outcomes for the children today that we're seeing than what we believe to be true? So this theory is actually being tested in autism clinics all over the US. Again, it's anecdotal, it's stories. Okay, so they're treating the underlying drivers of disease to see if they can improve the health of these kids. There's a growing grassroots movement in the US where parents are leading the charge to work with these types of practitioners to see if they can identify the imbalances, modify the lifestyle, the diet, do individualized biomedical therapies, and see if they can improve their child's health and functioning. So what is the strategy that we would use, or what is the strategy that parents commonly use to do this kind of work? So I'm going to go through very briefly a 4-step kind of strategy. The first step is parent-driven assessments of supports and stressors in an environment. So that means a parent goes into their home and says, all right, what is new to nature in my home? What's chemical? What might be toxic? What might be a stressor? It could be artificial lights. It could be fluorescent light bulbs that are literally stimulating an immune response in your child's body. Okay? And then going through their life and saying, what are the supports? What am I not doing enough of? Does my child have clean water? Is my child not getting natural sunlight enough? Is my child going to bed early enough? Those are examples of supports. So the parent identifies the things that they can in their own environment to improve their child's health. The second thing they do is they find other parents who are on the same journey and are doing the same kind of work, and they find practitioners who are also doing the same kind of work. And as an example, in this room right now, there's a woman named Suman, who's sitting right here, who has a clinic, who's actually treated, is Lupa in here right now? Lupa, are you in here? So Suman has worked with a family, and it's okay, you don't have to bring him up, it's okay. But Lupa, maybe just say hello so people could come and see you later. And Lupa has a son who has cerebral palsy and has worked in Suman's clinic. He didn't speak and he couldn't walk, and now he's doing both and developing and doing incredibly. That's fine. You don't have to show him, it's fine. My point is just to tell you that these people are out there doing the work, and they may not be front and center, but you can look for them, but you gotta connect and find the people who are doing this work. So the other step is rebalance the imbalances. I had mentioned before gut microbiome. That's an example of something you can do through diet. You can modify the gut microbes that live there through diet. Nutritional deficiencies. Children on the autism spectrum are oftentimes deficient in zinc, magnesium, essential fatty acids, and that's something you can modify through diet, and there's many others. And step 4 is rehabilitation. Again, this is very much unique to autism in the sense, or ADHD, or neurobehavioral or neurodevelopmental disorders, but they are doing works and therapies that actually help to make new connections in the brain, to reestablish milestones that were skipped or delayed or stalled. And so there are bioindividual therapies. So just some key insights from those who have achieved this quote-unquote optimal outcome. Parent-led intervention is key, and an integrative approach is key. So that's looking at the whole child, all the things in and around this child's life, from relationships to what they're putting in their mouth to what they're putting on their skin. And the other piece I'll say is that the parents are so key. Parents drive this. They know their child better than anyone else, and they know what can help their child. There's many resources and professional organizations in the United States. There's a few outside the US that I know of, like the Mind Institute in Australia. I can point you to some more resources. That's why I've put them in here. Anybody can find me later, and I can point you in the direction of those resources. The last thing I want to talk about is a research program that my organization, Epidemic Answers, is sponsoring. It's called Documenting Hope. And what this research organization is doing, or this research project is doing, is trying to prove that total load theory is meaningful to our kids. And so we have two, this is our website, documentinghope.com. We have two scientific programs that we're doing. The first one is an inventory where we are collecting data about children's, everything in and around a children's life, what's in their environment, what are they eating, and we're correlating that with symptoms, diagnoses, and health outcomes. And the second one is a longitudinal study where we're actually taking a child who has an autism spectrum disorder, removing the stressors, adding in supports, and tracking what happens when we give them bioindividualized therapies over 18 months. And we're documenting this using biometrics, and we're documenting it on film. So this is what's known as the Documenting Hope Project, where we're testing this total load theory. I just put these up here as additional resources. These are my two books where I've documented cases of children who have reversed their chronic health conditions. This is our website, epidemicanswers.org. And the last thing I wanted to do is share with you a video that explains what we're doing in the Documenting Hope Project. And if anybody has any questions later about the research that we're supporting or the resources that we provide for parents, I'll obviously be around, so please do come find me. So I think we're ready to watch that film. Oops. I think the volume. Could you back it up so we can, yeah, thank you.
The government says autism is showing up in children more than before.
1 in 50 school children has a form of autism.
Asthma rates rising dramatically over the past decade.
More than 1 in 7 children in the U.S. receiving a diagnosis of ADHD.
Numbers from the CDC have steadily increased in the past decade.
In the last 30 years, obesity rates for kids have tripled.
Frightening to parents to hear those dramatic numbers.
It may reduce the life expectancy of this generation of children and diminish their quality of life.
Our kids are sick. They're screaming out. They want help.
He still didn't have a single word. He was drooling. He was rubbing his head against the carpet. He was pushing himself into walls.
His eyes swelled shut. He was covered with hives from head to foot.
Probably around 14, 15 months, all that language disappeared.
From all that I can see, it looks like we've got a child here with pervasive developmental delay.
Noah, you keep holding your stomach. Does your side hurt?
Having a child with autism, it's not what you envision.
Unfortunately today, too many of our children, by analogy, function as canaries in the coal mine. They are teaching us that something is deeply out of order, deeply imbalanced, deeply in need of understanding, and largely lacking in therapy.
I think the first step to transforming this problem is to understand it. And we have not done a great job at that in healthcare.
We know that when our bodies are hit with toxins, it interferes with our biochemistry. They are not prepared for handling the 85,000 toxic chemicals on the market.
Whatever is lacking of essential nutrients that the body cannot make is going to control that whole system of cellular biology.
The brain is a physical organ of the body, and its health depends on the health of the cells. And when we address the body problems, the brain problems start to resolve.
What's wrong?
Most of the pediatricians I went to see basically told me there was no chance for recovery.
Your son was just born with this, and it would be best for you and your husband to just accept your new normal.
I knew Ben was going to get better the day I got the diagnosis. He's not going to get better? No, I'm not really hearing that.
When you tell a person that there's no hope, that their child will always be this way, that there's nothing you can do about it, that's not science. That's a misuse of statistics.
The doctors said, no, your boy will have autism for a very long time, but my mother didn't give up. She kept on thinking of ways to try and get rid of autism.
There's an abundance of intriguing individual cases, or what we call anecdotes. They cry out to be better studied and documented.
So to think that just a few short years ago, he had to be in a room with an air purifier plugged in to his nebulizer, flash forward to now, and he loves to hike and he loves to be outside. He couldn't do that a couple years ago.
People say kids can't recover. Well, they do recover. I've seen it. I've seen kids recover from autism, from ADHD, from Tourette's. I've seen it.
I feel like his true personality is coming through again. He has so many friends. He's got more best friends than I can count.
When he's doing BMX at the track and I'm sitting there watching him, come on, go, go! I just know that there's no limits to what he can do.
If we do the science deeply, we will be able to document in ways that cannot be dismissed what many of us think we've been observing anecdotally, which is the improvements in these children.
This is one of the most important public health and scientific issues. We need to figure out how these people get better and reverse engineer it so we can do it for everyone.
Research has been largely fragmented across different communities and in different silos.
And I agree with our colleagues. There is no sufficiently documented comprehensive study that has thus far been executed. That's part of the fierce urgency for now.
We've been trained to believe that these illnesses are genetic and inborn and we need some kind of scientific miracle. That's not what we need right now. We need a fundamental rethinking on the optimization of our health and the minimization of threats to our health.
As we blaze this trail, others can learn as we have that it is possible to look at the individual, to remove obstacles to recovery, to evoke healing responses, and to do that in a way that is both very personal and rigorously scientific.
We're losing a generation of children. That's what's at stake.
If we project the current trends forward just half a century, everyone will be in a hospital bed taking care of the person next to them. We cannot continue on the current trajectory, and yet it shows no signs of abating.
Clearly there's something going on and there's something wrong when I can walk into a room of 20 kids and I know beyond a shadow of a doubt that there's at least one EpiPen in that room.
The economic cost is astronomical to our society, and the societal costs alone are tremendous.
Something is hurting our children, and pretty soon it's going to be 1 and 2. And then what? Then are we going to look at the issue?
The time is now for the scientific community to take recovery, environment, and nutrition seriously. Our future depends on it.
We need to start talking about our children's health.
The first day that I dropped him off and I picked him up and I put him in the car and I was like, did you have a great day at school? He's like, oh, I had a great day at school. And I was like, I am so proud of you, Connor. And from the back seat I hear, oh, I'm so proud of you too, Mom. I'm like, no, I'm proud of you. No, I'm proud of you. I won. And I'm here. The reason why I'm doing this is I'm here to tell other parents, like, you can win too.
So I've gone way over time, so just wanted to, in closing, let you know that this is a project, the Documenting Hope Project, that's a not-for-profit initiative. We're doing it through philanthropic donations, and we have our first study underway, IRB approved, regulatory approval, and we're working on the second study, which is what this one is about, is taking 14 children and putting them through a pilot program. So again, thank you so much for your time, and I hope to speak with many of you more over the coming days. Thank you.